Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 79 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. The proof of weapons network is crumbling through a controlled demolition right in front of our eyes as people are protecting themselves with the proof of work. Peaceful proof of work is crowding out violent proof of weapons. And this week, the proof of weapons network started a new front of war. It is getting desperate to prop up the US dollar Ponzi scheme. It is looking for more death and destruction in order to keep the system alive, but there is no stopping this force. President Trump has set the tariffs, and the tariffs will never make America great again, but it will turn it into a regional power as we transition to this multipolar world. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing the multipolar world from three different angles: the impact on Bitcoin, the impact on macro, and the impact on the geopolitical side. We're going to be covering everything that's happened this week, and we're going to be diving deep into those three topics. If you are new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years dedicated to investing, monetary reform, and then later Bitcoin. 14 years in Bitcoin. And ever since $3, people have managed to peacefully protect themselves and build economic power by demonetizing the fiat debt-based proof of weapons network Ponzi scheme. And it has never been more clear to me that we are going through one of these once-in-a-generation transitions, and everybody needs to protect themselves. So get ready for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, because we're going to be diving into this week in Bitcoin macro and geopolitics through Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79. Now, as a recap, my long-term followers, you will know that way back on this channel in 2009, I uploaded a video to YouTube called The Great Depression of the 2020s. So this was even from a 2007 talk. This is pre-Bitcoin, where I was predicting that the debt-based Ponzi scheme would hit this inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed leverage point, and we would enter into what I called at the time the Great Depression of the 2020s. In 2019, a decade later, I released a 4-part video series where I shared exactly, and you can still get this from the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Just create a membership on simondixon.com. But I shared the 4 videos in order to get people prepared for this moment that is happening right now, so you can be ready for any economic environment. Early next year, I'm going to be doing the 2026 version of the proxy Great Depression of the 2020s. The team has been working on it. But on April the 2nd, 2025, President Trump delivered Liberation Day. And Liberation Day was, in fact, liberation for all of those that have been destroyed, raped, pillaged, and stealed from the dollar and the proof of weapons network, and the infiltration that the Federal Reserve, when it transitioned the American economy to be asset stripped for the banks, for the shareholders of the Fed, just as the Bank of England did for England, and just as the European Central Bank has been doing for Europe, as it strips the world of their assets and doesn't invest in this infrastructure, doesn't invest in its people, because the ECB is not European first. The Fed is not America first, and the Bank of England is not Brits and England first. And so we're going to be covering what has happened since Liberation Day. If you did not watch last week's episode, Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 78, where I deconstructed the true meaning behind Scott Bessent's interview, the US Treasury Secretary, where I went through word by word what it means and what they're doing, so that you can do the opposite of what they're telling you to do, because everything they are telling you to do is the opposite of what they're doing with their money. So we're going to discuss it today. I'm going to show you what they're doing with their money so that you can be more prepared for this multipolar world order. So let's start right now with this week in Bitcoin. The financial terrorists, Cantor Fitzgerald, headed up by, or used to be headed up, or the founder, Howard Lutnick, who is the Commerce Secretary of the Trump administration right now, announced that they're going to be raising $3 billion to create, quote, a massive stockpile of Bitcoin. So he wanted to pump the shit into these wild, volatile markets, the stock of Cantor Fitzgerald, which I think went up at about 30%. I haven't been following it. But he wanted to create a pump so that he could announce that he's going to be loading up Cantor Fitzgerald with Bitcoin. Just so you know, Cantor Fitzgerald is a primary dealer for the Federal Reserve. There's only 25 of those. And those primary dealers get to sell and benefit from rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme by selling government debt. And Scott Bessent, as he said when he took the office, he is a bond salesperson. At the same time, we got Michael Saylor announced that he's going to be raising enough money to buy approximately, at today's price, another 590,000 more Bitcoin into his company Strategy, which is going to be $84 billion raise, $42 billion equity, and $42 billion corporate debt. Now, who are those corporate debts? Who are those buying those bonds? That is the banks and financial institutions that are rolling and managing your money via institutions like BlackRock. And the reason why, if you look at the largest lenders to the US government, Japan is going down, China is going down. The international scene are lending less to the US government, but Cayman Island is going up. And that's not because Cayman Island is lending a load of money to the US. It's because they are packaging up your pensions to make you the bag holders of the final barrels of the US debt while they try and roll it over and roll it over and roll it over until eventually it cannot be rolled over no more. And the Federal Reserve has its tools. And its tools for the banks are able to pump the market, sell their positions, and redeploy their capital into the multipolar world that we will be covering. And so they are getting everything ready for that. Essentially, Strategy, which I think is working for the investment banks that are raising this finance, and who are the investors that are subscribing to these corporate bonds, they're the same banks and financial institutions that crashed the crypto and Bitcoin market in 2022, that created the artificial bank run in 2023, that crashed the three crypto banks, Signature, Silvergate, and Silicon Valley Bank. And then BlackRock got approved after Operation Choke Point 2.0 in order to launch the Bitcoin ETF. And now the SEC said, we'll give an exemption to Bank of New York Mellon. Who's Bank of New York? Oh, the same Mellon family that banked the Trump administration, the second largest contributor after Elon Musk. Elon Musk, the person that's creating a technocracy, a stateless, non-American first technocracy using artificial intelligence, using driving data, using X, and building that all into essentially combining it with FICO and your social data. Sounds to me like a social credit score, because all they do is lie to you and propagandize you into believing that you don't have the same system that overtly exists within China. Instead, you have it covertly, and you think that you have something differently. Anyway, they are building it up and ratcheting up as they test whether the First Amendment even exists anymore, as they package up people that are protesting in the universities because they don't want their university endowment funds to be investing in the military industrial complex, which is murdering people around the world to prop up the dollar. And because students are protesting against that, they're literally packaging them up with no due process and sending them and selling them into a prison in El Salvador, where they will never see their partners and their loved ones and their children again. Even when judges come along and say that is the wrong person to be putting in El Salvador, and all because the laws are changing, saying you cannot talk against Israel under anti-Semitism law, as they weaponize the trauma that was inflicted upon after World War II or during World War II by the same people, the Europeans that are essentially in Palestine right now, as they use these laws to test whether they can amend the First Amendment right. And they can test whether you will comply. And people are cheering it along, saying, we're making America great again. Well, anyway, now if MicroStrategy, who essentially works for the banks at this point, having raised billions and billions and billions of dollars for corporate bond issuers that are not getting enough returns, and so they need to turn to Bitcoin. They're looking to supplement those pensions via the Cayman Island packages by buying this debt instruments. And these debt instruments, some of them are promising based upon a belief that the price of Bitcoin will go up, which I agree with over time. But as we get closer and closer to the financial terrorists like Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald, who is connected directly into the last bit of the debt-based Ponzi scheme for the dollar, they are preparing and engineering exactly what we saw in 2022. And for those of you that were not around, we'll cover more on that as well, because I was around and very involved in some of those bankruptcies. In fact, the proof of weapons network, I had a policy which I violated. I decided to borrow against some of my Bitcoin. And in fact, next Friday, Maszynski will be facing up to 20 years for the work that he did in stealing money. I ended up with approximately $45 million of Bitcoin that I was borrowing against. Fortunately for me, it was risk managed. So, it was okay for me. But other people had 100% of their Bitcoin that they were borrowing against, and they ended up with no Bitcoin and wrecked at the end. I'm going to share the lessons, because all they do is they use financial manipulation by the Federal Reserve. They hike rates and inflation is transitory. They use Operation Choke Point 2.0. They co-opt the regulators in order to engineer the game in their favor. They pay the politicians to exert their strategy, and then they can create a ginormous pump and dump in order to take you and part you from your Bitcoin, all because you entrusted them. The very same banks that are the ones that engineered the system in your favor, that have been stealing all your wealth all along, and you thought, I need the banks in order to buy Bitcoin. Not Bitcoin hard talk, people. We're going to make sure none of that happens. But if Michael Saylor, who essentially now works for the banks because of the amount he's raised from the banks, and I think will be weaponized as a tool in order to get that Bitcoin from you at some stage, watch it. We'll engineer it over the next 2 years, maybe even sooner. But in MicroStrategy may end up, if he gets the Bitcoin at the current price, and maybe he won't, with over 1 million Bitcoin and close to the Satoshi Nakamoto wallets. And so this is, people are cheering it along. It doesn't matter. Fortunately, Bitcoin's proof of work. So if you own your Bitcoin in self-custody and you don't borrow against it and you don't leverage it, you'll be fine. In fact, you'll be the person that's buying Bitcoin on the cheap, just like they will be, as long as you get yourself ahead of the game and you don't fall for their financial weapons of mass destruction. So at the same time, what is the Trump administration doing? Well, firstly, the Department of Justice decided to take this opportunity to dismantle its crypto enforcement unit. Convenient. So Howard Lutnick is setting up his Bitcoin borrow against your Bitcoin leverage system. And all of the other financial traditional markets like Strategy are getting ready to create a big honeypot of Bitcoin. And now the Department of Justice doesn't have a department. So if you wanted to steal everybody's Bitcoin, this is the time to do it while Trump is in charge. And then you create a deregulating environment so that all of this is possible. And now you've got organizations like Galaxy Digital that are announcing that they're going to be going public with their Bitcoin mining company and their Bitcoin investment bank, the same Bitcoin investment bank that will probably be structuring into the public markets SPACs where you reverse engineer Bitcoin into a public company. And then they allow people to collateralize some of that Bitcoin and use financial weapons of mass destruction to persuade you to borrow against your Bitcoin so that you hold it with them so that they can charge a fee and earn some interest off hard money. If this is not familiar, this is exactly what happened with the banking system. This is how fiat currency was created. They persuaded you to put your gold with them because it's very hard to self-custody gold. And so you put it with the goldsmiths, and then the goldsmiths start issuing more receipts, and they allow you to borrow against your Bitcoin. That receipt for gold becomes as good as gold. And then they would issue more and more receipts, and then eventually you can't even get your gold, and you end up with them stealing your gold in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then marking the gold to market like the US government has done at $42 after they stole it from you after the Fed created the pump and dump of the roaring 20s, followed by the Great Depression of 33. So Galaxy Digital is going to be listing on NASDAQ. They're applying for that. Charles Schwab, the largest retail brokerage in the world. I think they manage something like $7.1 trillion for retail. They're going to be offering their Bitcoin services. Cantor Fitzgerald, one of those primary dealers in the US Treasuries, he's getting involved in everywhere. They're now being authorized to trade directly into the Federal Reserve, became a shareholder in Tether. You know that I was a shareholder, still am a shareholder in Bitfinex. I invested in over 100 companies in the industry. Tether is a sister company, but they got investigated by the Department of Justice, and now all of a sudden they're working with Cantor Fitzgerald managing those treasuries, and now Cantor Fitzgerald is a shareholder. You know how the proof of weapons network works. They miss Bitcoin, they crash the market, they take over as much of the Bitcoin as they can to try and steal it from you, because they know that Bitcoin has been the highest performing asset class, demonetizing all of their products. It outperformed every hedge fund. It outperformed all of their funds. It outperformed all of their gold, all of their real estate. All of their products were outperformed by Bitcoin. They couldn't beat us, and so they joined us. The good thing is, Satoshi anticipated this already. Proof of work means that you can own your Bitcoin in self-custody, but many people will own it with them and borrow against it and lever up and have to be taught the lesson again, that leverage is where everything goes wrong. That's where you can end up with no Bitcoin, because they manipulate that. That was the tool that the central banks created when they created the debt-based Ponzi scheme. They outsourced the dollar to the private banks. The private banks became the shareholders in the Federal Reserve. They meet every quarter. They tell Jerome Powell, go say this. And we'll send some money over through the banking lobby over to the Trump administration. Trump, you do this. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. You just need to follow their money and not their words, and you'll be ahead of the game. So now FDIC, the same FDIC that insures and decides which bank to take over, the same FDIC that says they insure your bank deposits, but only has 1% of the bank deposits that it says that it's insuring, because it doesn't insure them. It can only insure one bank so that it can take over a bank when it needs to, roll it up into the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like JP Morgan. And anytime it gets bigger, they socialize the losses. You pay the inflation. They construct weapons of mass destruction. They do their QE. And then they privatize the gains. And you get all of that wealth inequality, which we have seen 20 times since the Federal Reserve was created. But of course, it is trying to stabilize markets. It is trying to maximize employment or unemployment. It is trying to keep inflation under control, while it's engineered in order to support the banks anyway. So now FDIC comes out and says, hey, banks, you don't need our permission. Put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, put crypto on your balance sheet, issue stable coins, no problem. And so now all the banks are getting ready for their strategy. They don't even need to go to the regulators in order to get any permission for that. They can do it. So now what are they going to do? They're all going to be announcing Charles Schwab, don't buy Bitcoin through me. BlackRock, don't buy Bitcoin, own Bitcoin through me. MicroStrategy, don't own Bitcoin. I'm going to give you X number of returns. And I'm even going to give you guaranteed income in dollars as long as the price of Bitcoin goes up. And Cantor Fitzgerald said, don't worry about those banks. We're going to launch our own stable coins. And Elon Musk says, don't worry about those banks. We're going to have our own stable coin. And yes, it's going to be integrated with your social credit score. And Trump says, don't worry, we're making America great again. I'm going to take those stable coins. I'm going to back it by US Treasuries. I'm going to get as much of those yield from the government, and I'm going to buy Bitcoin just like Tether does. I am shorting the dollar and buying Bitcoin at the same time as pretending to you that I am negotiating deals to make America great again. You get the picture? And who is Trump paid for? By Elon Musk, the Mellon family, Adelson, all of these non-America first institutions. The same people that paid Jerome Powell's bill pay Trump's bill. You think they're fighting? They're in the same team. And once you know that, you know that. Make sure you watch my video from last week to understand how the proof of weapons network, I deconstructed the whole thing, the layer 3 concept. This is the most important thing. When I do my spaces and I come up and I tell people, months ahead, what I think is going to happen based upon following the money, they all call me a conspiracy theorist. And yet, who has consistently got people ahead of these trends? Look back at the track record throughout this whole YouTube channel. Consistent getting people ahead of the trends. Why? Because they call me a conspiracy theorist when I just say no. It's just motivations. It's just game theory. It's just follow the money. Don't listen to what they say. While they're listening to what they say and they argue with me saying, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. That can't be true. Then it happens. And then they say, oh yeah, that was obvious. That's exactly what happened with monetary reform. I was telling people about the Ponzi scheme called the banks. And then they were chucking me out of universities when I was talking about this. Then suddenly they come back later saying, yeah, this is obvious that banks create money. And yes, it is. We have to roll over. And as long as we grow the economy by greater than the amount we take on the debt, all good, bro. Don't worry about wealth inequality. Just keep my stocks up. Just keep my stocks up. Keep my real estate up. Don't mess with my real estate. Don't mess with my stocks. I don't care by the fact that the vast majority of Americans are addicted to drugs. Not the vast majority, but record high rates. I don't care that there's mental illness at all-time high. I don't care about the homeless problem. I don't care about the fact that no one can own their real estate and wealth inequality is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't care about Americans. I care about my stock because you bought into the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, whereas Bitcoin allows you to reverse that trend, peacefully opt out, and reverse the strategy so that you can start to be the person that you were born to be. The person that has the good inside, that is not trying to simp for the Federal Reserve and the bank shareholders while it's asset stripping the American people. And just look at what's happening in Europe. We're going to cover that there as well. So anyway, now the banks can have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And thanks to the Trump administration, it's not even going to be off balance sheet. It's not going to be a custody relationship. It's going to be stick it on your balance sheet and lever up. Lever up. So now we've got the primary dealers of the Federal Reserve activated. We've got the technocrats and the Trump administration that are all launching their stable coins. We've got the banks that are all going to be launching their stable coins, rinsing as much of that yield as they can. We've got all of these different players that are setting up their Bitcoin mining companies. Now, thankfully, this is just America. Bitcoin's a global play. There's only about 40% of the hash rate in America. They can go lever up and play their debt-based Ponzi scheme games. But in the other parts of the world that don't have debt-based Ponzi schemes, that still have sovereignty, that still reinvest into their people and their infrastructure, they're also mining Bitcoin. They're also using this the way that it was designed without creating a debt-based Ponzi scheme on top of it. And you can opt out. And that's the point. You can opt out. You don't need to play their game. That's the way this was designed. Because of course they are setting up an almighty pump and dump. And this time it's not going to be a dump because they want your Bitcoin, because they know what's happening to the proof of weapons network, because they are the same people that own the politicians, that own all the stocks, their positions in all the stocks, that control the capital flows, that know that they are asset stripping Americans, that know that they are asset stripping Europeans, that know that they are asset stripping Brits. And they know that stable coins is their mechanism for getting the final bag holders in America, your pension, to hold the bag because no one else abroad wants it, because there is a strategy of multipolarity being executed as we speak. And so what else did we get as an announcement? Well, Tether, the one that became more profitable than Citibank by issuing a stable coin and using it to buy Bitcoin with the yield that the government pays, they're going to be doing a partnership with SoftBank. Who's SoftBank? SoftBank the private equity fund, the hedge fund that gains access to the Bank of Japan, the proxy central bank that was set up after World War II in order to rinse money from the Japanese people, in order to accelerate assets and then borrow at 0%, hedge out the currency risk so that you can create derivatives with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. And then you can use that in order to pump up the stocks. And then you can pump up the price of stocks so that executives can meet their bonus option schemes. And then they can use that in order to extract more value out of their stocks. And then they can use that in order to borrow at 0% from the Federal Reserve, from the Bank of Japan, so that they can then speculate and at the same time short the stocks when they need to hedge against anything that goes wrong. This is how the system is set up. And you're being told that this is capitalism. No, this is the Federal Reserve, crony capitalist, unfree market. 30% of your GDP is government expenditure. China's at 47%. You're only 17% away. And yet they're the evil communists. And you're the capitalists that believe in everything, the good of the world. So anyway, Tether, SoftBank, access to the Bank of Japan carry trade. And Jack Mallers, a Bitcoin guy who they just plastered in. I'm sorry, Jack. You worked with us on the El Salvador strategy. I appreciate your work up to this date, but either you are swimming with sharks now. You are full blown in the Federal Reserve System. This is like a mafia. You are deep state now. You're no longer a Bitcoiner. You can paste your Bitcoin narrative on top of it, but you have sold your soul. Once you go in those circles, it's like, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. You never leave. The deep state mafiosa network. This is as deep state as it gets, because who are you working with? Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick. And they're launching a company called 21. And what is 21 doing? 21 is essentially taking money from SoftBank, money from Tether, money from Cantor Fitzgerald, and building a new public company to compete with Strategy that will have access to Cantor Fitzgerald's financial weapons of mass destruction, that will be a Bitcoin native company. And they're going to be doing the tool that they usually do, a SPAC, which is where you reverse the assets into an existing public company. And then you do some financial engineering in order to revalue the company. And then you revalue the company, you put some Bitcoin in. So they're going to be putting, and then you find some kind of business to do. What business do you think they're going to be doing? Probably working with Cantor in order to become a SPAC company that will get as much Bitcoin in this honeypot and network that they're creating to try and trick you out of your Bitcoin so that you put your Bitcoin with them and borrow against it. And then they're going to be partnering with, Cantor Equity Partners, and they're putting 42,000 Bitcoin into it initially, reverse engineering it into a SPAC. And they are now engineering the stablecoin strategies as well at the same time. What's happening with the stablecoin regulation? Well, it says we would like a 2 years head start where we don't compete with DeFi. And of those stablecoins, we want the stablecoin issuer to keep the yield. They're not allowed to pass the yield on. Why do they want that? Because they are using these financial weapons of mass destruction in order to get as many dollars from you so that they can lend it to the government. The government pays them yield and they can buy the Bitcoin. They are shorting the dollar and going long Bitcoin for as many as they want. And they're making it where the yield cannot be passed on. So they won't allow you to receive the yield, and then you take that yield and you buy Bitcoin. We're going to have to construct financial products. The stablecoin issuers, which are all around the Trump administration, all of the banks, all of the technocrats, all of those that paid, they're going to be shorting the dollar while they pretend that they're making America great again. This is exactly what happened to Europe when the ECB was created and the European Union was created. This is a takeover bid by technocracy in order to asset strip while it transitions to a multipolar world. They are creating the honeypot to short the dollar, go long Bitcoin, and then they create the financial weapons of mass destruction to deceive you out of your Bitcoin so that you borrow against your Bitcoin in order to try and get some dollars so they can then do exactly what they did last time, hiked rates, said inflation was transitory, created a series of events that then crashed the Three Arrows Capital hedge fund, that then crashed the Alameda Capital, whatever it was called, Alameda Research Hedge Fund, that was connected to stealing people's Bitcoin in FTX. And those hedge funds were borrowing that money from Celsius, from Voyager, from BlockFi, so that retail and pensioners had the exposure. And then they left a scamming, lying piece of shit, Alex Majinsky, who would then go to YouTube every week and say, this is the safest place for your money. Borrow against your Bitcoin so that you don't need to pay tax, so that you can empty out your pension. I will invest it in stable coins, and this is safer than a bank. And then all of that cascading liquidation sent the price of Bitcoin down to $17,000 from a peak of $69,000. And what did they do? They put the company in bankruptcy on the very date when Bitcoin is at its lowest, because when you go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, you get to not owe them the Bitcoin, you owe them the dollar value of the Bitcoin. So you crash the price of Bitcoin, send the company bankrupt, put it into Chapter 11, mark the Bitcoin to market at $17,000, and then you take as long as possible. FTX stole $1 billion from client money. The lawyers at Celsius stole about $400 million. You take 2 years playing that game. Meanwhile, the price of Bitcoin recovers. And then you say, right, I'm going to sell the Bitcoin, give you your dollar value back, and then we get to keep all the upside of the Bitcoin. But this time, we can do it through FDIC-insured banks. And because the insurance doesn't exist, we can socialize the losses, privatize the game, back the stable coin by the new treasuries that are going to be issued directly in order to back those stable coins, while the Trump administration, while Cantor Fitzgerald, while all of those that get the stable coins get to short the dollar, go long Bitcoin, and benefit from it. That's what you got to avoid yourself. And in fact, next week, next Friday, the Department of Justice, they don't even care about their team players. Majinsky was installed to execute this vision. The other co-founders, they all went back and did business with President Netanyahu and got exile in Israel. But Majinsky, he was the one that is going down because he was the front man that was doing all the lying, that got to have hundreds of millions hidden in trust companies called Koala 1, Koala 2, and Koala 3, where his wife, Chrissy Majinsky, is essentially getting the beneficiary while he goes to prison and she gets to spend that money. And they siphon out hundreds of millions of dollars through these trust companies and trust structures, while the co-founders go and get exile in Israel and build a new AI startup with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. So Majinsky is going to be sentenced on the 8th of May, 2025, next Friday. For those of you that are Celsius creditors, I'll run a space and we can share the outcome as well. I believe I funded a documentary that's going to be creating a documentary out of this. They're going to be doing a get-together in New York if you guys are in New York. And the Department of Justice came out and recommended minimum of 20 years for Majinsky. I'm not sure if he's going to be in the same place that they put SBF and P. Diddy. They're sharing the same place, and maybe Majinsky can be put in there as well. But at the same time, Senator Cynthia Lummis, she's coming out and saying that we need to pass the Bitcoin Act. It is the only solution to pay off our $36 trillion of debt. You know what's happening here. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is not going to be for America. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is not going to be for the states. The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is going to be for the banks and financial institutions that are asset stripping Americans of their Bitcoin as we speak. Because America is not for the Americans. And the Trump administration is a psyop to trick you out of your Bitcoin. And we'll go through how that happens on the Bitcoin side, then the macro side, and the geopolitical side as well. Why is that not possible? If Bitcoin was used to pay off the $36 trillion of debt, Remember the Federal Reserve System. Banks create dollars every time they issue a loan. Government debt backed by war is the mechanism for issuing those dollars. If you want to pay down the debt, you pay down the dollars. If you pay down the dollars, $37 trillion of money disappears from your economy, which would crash the banks, crash the system, and enter into the Great Depression of the 2020s. Now, I think they're going to do it via proxy, and I'll go through what I think is going to come in the macro section. But can we stop pretending that this Bitcoin strategic reserve is going to pay off the debt? What you can do is you can have a parallel asset. You can steal as much Bitcoin as possible, like you're doing from Bitfinex shareholders right now, like you did from Ross Ulbricht. That's why you gave him a pardon from the Silk Road, because that's your Bitcoin strategic reserve, and you're setting up and engineering the system so that you end up with the Bitcoin, not the treasury. Why? Because the banks own treasury. The banks own the Federal Reserve. It is all a smokescreen and a fake distraction designed at doing exactly what they're doing in Europe today, extracting value, pretending you're fighting for democracy. If you listen to our leaders, at least we know our leaders are corrupt. You know, Keir Starmer waving the Ukrainian flag as he sends $3 billion to be sent to military contractors in America, while people are there's homelessness, there's no one's picking up rubbish from the streets, there's potholes across the streets. UK, I mean, I left in 2015 because it was in decline. It's deteriorating. And of course, they've got $3 billion to send to the military contractors because Keir Starmer works for those same banks and military companies as well, just as Trump does, just as Biden does, just as Obama does, just as they all do. It is one smoke screen. And once you realize that, your job is to boycott the system, de-weaponize their debt, to spend local, and to save in Bitcoin and enter into the reverse of the system so that you build economic power, so that you're protected and you can protect your family because they're protecting themselves by dumping their assets on you and asset stripping you. Because capital, these banks have no emotion, no humanity. They don't care about country. They only care about stealing your money. Because the US dollar is debt and you can't pay off the debt. So why is everybody lying? That's not how it works. Anyway, hopefully you're smarter than that and you can start to see through the smoke screen, and you can get upset with me. You can call me a conspiracy theorist, but come back in a year or two when you see this unfold, and go back if you want through my whole YouTube channel, because I've been publishing the whole journey, and everything that was a conspiracy theory in the beginning tends to be how the hell, thank you for getting me ahead of that trend. And I've been telling everyone to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month on constantly ever since 2011 when Bitcoin was $3. We're talking multi-billionaires that have built economic power that are able to influence, and I ain't stopping until my voice is gone. And all you got to do is recognize that you were given a gift and stop fueling the fire of the proof of weapons network that is leading to, we are in a changing time, and we got to go through that as well. It seems way more likely to me that the plan is to keep issuing the debt, probably do it via stable coins, allow the Federal Reserve the opportune moment when it wants to do the pump and dump. And the stablecoin issuers are going to be those that are connected to the Trump administration, the Howard Lutnicks, the Elon Musk, the ones that paid for the Trump administration, while they quietly accumulate their own Bitcoin strategic reserves, and effectively short the dollar and go long Bitcoin, follow their money, don't listen to what they're doing. And I will also notice, where are they investing their money? Where are those Trump towers appearing right now? Are they appearing in Qatar? Are they appearing in UAE? Are they appearing in Saudi Arabia? Are they appearing in China? Where's the Trump towers in America? He's asking people, those Qataris, to do foreign direct investment to buy assets from America while he's putting Trump towers up in Qatar. And what does foreign direct investment do? He's saying, we're winning. We're negotiating deals. What does negotiating a deal mean? It means you're doing the reverse IMF. The IMF was set up to invest in companies to kill and asset strip those countries so that they can use financial weapons of mass destruction to subdivert and control those countries. When he's saying invest in us, he's saying own us. Because I'm investing where you are, and we have asset stripped and securitized and financialized the entire economy, the entire political process, and we're asking you to buy us, and we're negotiating a deal for you. Capital outflows happen when foreigners invest because they want a return in investment, which means more money exits the country. You're even selling citizenship for $5 million a pop. You're asking people right before, while Trump is investing abroad, to buy $5 million a pop in order to enter a country that they're taking to civil unrest, that they're not investing in their people, and they're about to set their people up for an almighty rug pull, where their mental illness is going to actually think, Trump, you were my savior. You were my last hope. You were the Messiah, and you've let me down. And they're going to remain Stockholm syndrome to him all along, thinking that their savior has come. And hopefully more people will see this and they can understand, because the Trump administration is asset stripping America, and he's asset stripping America because this is how the system works. This is not about Trump. This is how the fake democracy works. This is why people are so frustrated, because we think that we have a democracy. We think we're involved in the political process, but they set up the game to do this. It's a debt-based Ponzi scheme by the Proof of Weapons Network that prioritizes war over people. This would be one of the most calculated rug pulls that we have seen, and I think we'll see it during the Trump administration. If I'm wrong, I'll let you know, but I hope that I'm getting you ahead. Meanwhile, the countries that actually invest in their people, that don't tax their people, that build sovereign wealth and sovereign reserves, that invest in their own infrastructure, that invest in their own people, that have invest in their own education rather than securitize, financialize, and install central banks that privatize the creation of money, they're buying up all of the assets of these robotics factories and this artificial intelligence and these data centers. They're even buying up, they spent $2 billion to invest in Binance so that they could be, with this capital outflows, there's even Circle, Circle, who's being acquired, Ripple's trying to buy it at the moment. Full disclosure, I sold my shares in Circle, but I still have indirect exposure through some of my companies. And Ripple Labs, I was a shareholder from a long time ago. They're now looking to merge, but where's Circle deciding? They're registering in Abu Dhabi because they need a tax neutral environment, while America tries to screw as much tax by getting you to put your Bitcoin in their structures. You think this is America first? This is working for the Americans. My job is to try and tell you how it really is. Don't shoot the messenger. People get really upset when I share this stuff. But the sooner you know it, you have to build a foundation on truth. And I'm sorry they lied to you again. This is pure deception. I'll admit if I'm wrong, but the money's saying I'm not wrong. And the money always helps me get ahead of the trends, because they're taking their government funds and they're investing it in things that makes their countries more valuable. They're doing it in sovereign wealth rather than doing it for private banks. They're building their reserves. They're the actual ones that are building the Bitcoin strategic reserves. At the sovereign level, they are mining. They're getting ready for this multipolar world. Binance even said, Binance, 260 million clients, was taken down by the Proof of Weapons Network, had to install a US compliance team. CZ had to negotiate 4 years in prison. And then they used the same old tricks to start seizing accounts of those that were, for example, using crypto in order to save their life during the genocide in Palestine. They started seizing those funds as part of it. And they're saying, Binance came out and CZ said, because now he's got protection in Dubai because he's working with, a country that actually is able to, look at how this can be utilized for the people. That sovereign wealth fund, he said that more and more sovereign wealth funds and nations are contacting Binance to set up their Bitcoin strategic reserves. So while America is creating an environment for the politicians to get their Bitcoin strategic reserves, the other countries are actually doing it. They're actually mining Bitcoin. They're actually owning Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They're actually owning Bitcoin strategic reserves because they know that Bitcoin is the mechanism in a multi-currency, multipolar world for opting out and being able to create a settlement layer in an environment where there's not going to be one world reserve currency. There's simply going to be technology used in order to settle trades in a multipolar world where those that have the most Bitcoin, the most resources, the most gold are going to be the ones that set the rules of the world order and exert economic power. And America is no longer that place. And that is telling us from the Bitcoin side. Let's look at it from the macro side. And let's also look at it from the geopolitical side. So now let's get into part 2, this week in macro. I'll tell you what's happening on the macro side. Now, remember, this won't be a surprise for any of you that have been following us all along. Remember what I said. Under Biden, he was backed by the military-industrial complex, so he takes us to World War III. Under Trump, he is more backed by banks, and so banks are investing in a multipolar world. So they can say, Trump, tell everyone we're doing tariffs and all the macro policy that I'll be going through right now. And then we can have a make America great again narrative while we transition to this multipolar world. The good thing is that the global hegemon, the dollar, is a much safer world to me. It is a world where we can actually have, trade, markets, hard money. We can actually have no fake engineered wars. In fact, the 100 covert wars that the dollar exerted for the Federal Reserve since World War II, we can enter into an environment where it's actually just about investing in countries, building countries and people using their own assets, which is why capital outflows are going into the global south, going into the Gulf countries, going into BRICS countries, and we're getting some of the final games. So this week in macro, let's jump straight into part 2. I'm just going to take a little bit of water. While I do that, please hit the like button. Please share. It's vitally important. Hey, we're getting a little bit of momentum, by the way. For a long time, my content was being oppressed. But I've got a theory. Now that YouTube, which is a part of the military-industrial complex to put that algorithm into NSA to give all that data, now that they're on the same team of weakening the dollar, I've noticed my subscribers have started to go up. I've noticed that they started to share. Last week, I got 17,000. Remember, I used to get like 500,000 to 180,000 views. Then I started telling the truth about and warning people, and they took my views right down to about 5,000, and then they shadow banned me to shit. Now, all of a sudden, they're taking my views up to like 17, 20,000 every time. Why? Because they want to weaken the dollar, and AI is controlling these algorithms now, and they're listening to everything that I'm saying. And this is in line with the agenda of going long Bitcoin, shorting the dollar. And so suddenly I get more views, but I still need your help. The subscribers are now going up. For a long time, it was just stuck there. And people were telling me they were subscribing and they get no notification. Now people are telling me it's actually working. So do me a favor. If you are not subscribed to my channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and hit the bell so you get a notification. If I get to 100,000, I get to review my account, and then they can say, I see that you are aligned with what we want right now, and therefore they can start sending more traffic and we get more people prepared. Please do that for me. I'm just going to take a bit of water. I just need you to put a comment. Please get the algorithms going, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And we're going to go through this week in macro and this week in geopolitics.